All right, welcome everybody to Friday. How you feeling? Woo! As much as you can be after last night, right? Thanks for coming to Zero to Hero, SPFx development techniques to boost the performance of SharePoint solutions. My name is David Warner. I'm a Microsoft MVP. I work for Catapult Systems, and I'm a big sports fan, as you can see, hockey and football, but an even bigger community fan of SharePoint. So I love engaging. There's my Twitter handle, my blog. I do a lot of videos. Do not hesitate to reach out to me if you have any questions at all. I love to interact with the community, love to help new people get into the community. So I look forward to collaborating with all of you. Let's review what we're going to discuss today. Now, the SharePoint Framework is a powerful engine that allows us to create elegant, complex, and very useful solutions for users. But it's not a black box, right? We don't just plug it in, turn it on, and walk away. We have extensibility. As developers, we can make it better. So within that engine, today, we're going to review 4 gears that we can hype up, amp up, and make better within the SharePoint Framework to increase performance. The first gear, we're going to cover PnP.js data caching. Second gear, we're going to look at optimized bundling and packaging of SPFx JavaScript bundles. Third gear, we're going to look at library components, the newest kid on the SPFx block, just out in 1.9.1. And the fourth gear, we're going to bring it all together and see how they can all work together. Now, we're going to have a little fun along the way. Each of these gears I've given a special name, and we're going to try to guess a couple of them. I'm going to give them to you at the first couple, and then as we get further in, we'll have a little fun. Now, this is an intermediate course, so we're not going to necessarily show how to create web parts from scratch. For example, I'm not going to show how to install PnP.js from scratch. Because of the little time we have together, we're going to focus on the techniques that we're looking at here. But I will try to assist along the way with any tips if you are new, so that you won't feel overwhelmed. I've also made sure that all the demos are using just out-of-the-box web parts, right? And you'll get a link at the end to access all of the demos. And so you can download them. They're individual. They're all using out-of-the-box web parts, each web part for a gear, so you'll be able to see the exact technique we're trying to accomplish within each section. How many are familiar with PnP, patterns and practices? All right. How many are using PnP, patterns and practices? All right, good portion of you. So we'll review what that is for some of you that aren't necessarily. There were some hands that weren't up. How many recognize this little guy? All right, a few. Microsoft lovingly created a mascot for us, right? So as you can imagine, I'm a big sports fan. I went nuts, fanatical, as you might see. So each section, we're going to have a different version of Parker. His name is Parker. And we're going to have each version of Parker to help us co-host into the rest of the sections. All right, so let's talk about first gear. Any race car fans? F1? F1 fans? I know we got one up here. I know we got one. Parker's going to go straight into turbo speed. We're going to hit the road, the rubber's going to hit the road, and we're going to take straight out of the gates. By the way, there's stickers for all these afterwards, so if you're a sticker fan, I've got you covered as well. So let's look at PnP.js. How many are using PnP.js? Okay, a few. It is a community-driven, Microsoft-started solution, right? The best way, how many are using jQuery or have used jQuery in the past, right? Okay. What jQuery did for the DOM, very easy. Object.css blah or object.onClick blah, right? Very simple way of simplifying some of that under-the-hood stuff that you would have had to write more code with in JavaScript. PnP.js does that. It's a fluent library. It's easier to read. It's asynchronous. It's built on promises. You can see there in the screenshots to access a list. It's as simple as sp.web.list.getByTitle, right? So it's very, very simple. Version 2 just debuted yesterday. The beta of it debuted yesterday. And so that's got some performance features built into it, such as individual loading. And so we don't have to load the entire thing. But today we're going to talk about built-in caching. PnP.js has a caching mechanism. Now, most of the time when we build solutions, we're connecting to lists, right? We're going to connect to list data. We're going to pull back list data. But quite often, we don't need to refresh that connection or that data payload every single time someone refreshes a page, right? Maybe a day, maybe 2 days, maybe a week. And so PNP.js gives us that opportunity to cache that data so that when the page is refreshed, it's not making a request back to the list to pull that data back in each and every single refresh. Now, what it gives us is it's got default caching, so you'll see in a moment how simple it is to implement it within the PNP.js request mechanism. You can globally configure the cache settings. You've got per call configuration, which is what we'll look at, batching, custom caching, right? And we're going to look at the per call. This is as simple as it is to start using caching. Now, this is going to do all the work for you. Obviously, when you implement the using caching, you don't necessarily get a lot of control. You're just simply saying, you do everything that's set up by default, and I'm just going to trust you, right? Now, that's not what we're going to do today. We want to take it a step further, and we want to go make an actual request. We want to define something. So you can see here on our per request opportunity, we're able to define an expiration date, in which case we're making it a little dynamic, right? So we're saying 20 minutes. We're going to be able to give it a key, and we'll see why that matters. You're going to be able to select the type of store name you want, which is local or session, right? So session is going to refresh when the browser window closes. Local is actually going to store it for the specified time, so that when your browser window closes, you bring it back up, you're still going to have cache until that time expires. So let's begin looking at a demo of PNP.js. And we have 4 demos, so we're going to move along pretty quickly, and that's why we're not necessarily going to show any of the scaffolding of new web parts or installation. I'm going to start out by showing you what we want our content to look like. Now, this is just a collection of community contributors. This is going to be the same sample data we're going to use for the entire duration of the session today. It's built on a SharePoint list, and it's using PNP.js to make the request to come back and get it. All right, so now that we know what it looks like, let's just go look at the list so you know I'm not lying. It is just a simple list, 3 columns. Title, which is our name, Twitter, which is the Twitter handle, and blog. And then the JavaScript is going out grabbing the bio picture and the URLs and all of that and bringing it back. So I'm going to go back to my demo, and I'm going to go ahead and just make sure we got a fresh payload. I'm going to refresh, and we see that there's 9 there now. Now, if I go into the list, and I'm going to add another person, I'll just add myself. And when we do this, we're going to go ahead, save that, we're going to come back, and we're going to refresh. And you see, I wasn't added, right? Why is that? Well, let's look at the code first, and then I'll show you how we see behind the scenes. So we've got our PNP.js web part. We've got all the web parts right here, right? Do you guys need me to kick up in the back the font size there? Yep. Let me go ahead and do that. Better? Yep, okay, good. We've got all of our gears here. We're going to go through them sequentially. So the first thing you'll see is I imported PNP.js. I'd already installed it, so if you're not familiar with that, there are lots of blogs that show how to do some of this scaffolding, build the web parts, build a library component, right? I don't want to waste your time showing you that when we can focus on these features. So we've done an import. I've done some setup here that I've hidden just for the dates, setting up the SPFx context for PNP. And then I've made a request to my list. Community contributors, the same list we were just looking at, requesting title, Twitter, blog, order by created, and then you'll notice I'm using caching. And so I'm saying I want to use the expire date, which is set up here in the region. My key is ZH0 to hero, first gear list data, right? And it's a session type storage. So I should be able to just refresh the page, close the browser, re-engage, and then see myself. Or we can look behind the scenes as well and see the actual session, and that's what we're going to do. And that's all there is to it. The rest of this is just an out-of-the-box web part. That's literally all I've done. Scaffolded an out-of-the-box web part, made a request, included using caching, identified the content that I wanted and the parameters for caching, and now we have caching. How simple is that? So let's see what that looks like. If we engage our dev tools, you can come, I'm in Chrome, you come onto the application. This is where you can see your local storage and your session storage. And so if I just do a filter on ZH, we can see right here is my storage key, right? So if I were to delete that, or simply refresh the browser in a new window, we'll just delete it. It's gone. Now I refresh, I'll close that, and there I am. Right? So the entire time it was refreshing just this local storage, or the session storage, which is fantastic. Now, you may be saying, all right, David, that's cool, excellent, but what if I actually wanted to pull that data in, not on page load, right? You might say, this is an intermediate course, I kind of know how bundling works. I'm pretty sure when you do an import of that PNP.js JavaScript and it bundles my web part, it's going to include all of the code for PNP.js. And it's going to load it on the page when the page loads. What if I don't want to do that? What if I want to allow the user to make a request for how many community contributors they want to see, and then I want to make the request, right? Because when we look behind the scenes, and I'll bring back up the dev tools, we'll look at network, and I'm going to do a refresh here, and we're going to look for my file, and we see here it is, 61.2 kilobytes, right? PNP.js is most of that. Now you may be saying, oh man, 61.2 kilobytes, that's not much, come on. But remember, it's the straw that broke the camel's back, right? When you start adding a lot of web parts and you start adding a lot of data to your page, every kilobyte counts and it starts adding up. So that leads us to our next gear. We're going to move into second gear. So Parker assisted us as an F1 racer. The rubber hit the road. Now we need the rubber to come off the road. So, do we have any pilots, fans of flying here? Anybody that's got the need? The need for speed, right? So, Parker is, I think he looks better than Tom Cruise, don't you? You like him? Optimized bundling and packaging of SPFx bundles. So for those that weren't necessarily familiar with what I meant when we talked about bundling, when you package up your SPFx web part to go put into your app catalog, it creates a singular bundle of your JavaScript. Everything you do, whether you're importing jQuery, PNP.js, Moment.js, or anything else, it's going to include it into that single file. Well, as we talked about, we may not necessarily want that. Right? We may need to delay that call or that inclusion of that code. And so that's what we're going to look at when we talk about optimized bundling and packaging. Here is an example of what it looks like if we do default bundling. Right? You can see down there at the bottom, in this case, I had bundled in, I think, jQuery. And so you can see the final payload is 100 kilobytes, right? 100K. And if we're not going to execute on that library, like we're going to show with PNP.js, then that's kind of a waste on the load. You do that across a number of web parts, and you're just causing, unneeded load at the time the user, and they're going to sit there and spin and wait and wait. Optimized bundling allows you to call in the needed pieces asynchronously at runtime and execution time. So here you can see we've split it up. Now, my payload for my web part is only 14 kilobyte all the way on the bottom, and the library had been split into another 87 kilobyte file. And then that doesn't get loaded at runtime. It only got loaded when I actually made the request. So let's see what that looks like. We're going to look at what the landscape is first. So here's the web part, right? We're making a request of how many community contributors we would like to see. So in this case, we don't necessarily need to load in PNP.js. So this is what the new web part looks like. This is what it's going to look like pretty much for the duration of all the rest of the demos. So we'll get comfortable with it. So let's go over to our code and see exactly what we're going to be working with. We'll close our first one. We'll go to second gear. And the first thing you may notice is that there's no import here. I'm not importing PNP.js at the top like I did at the web part, right? Because it's not something that we want to import by default. It's something that we want to bring in later. But you may notice that I've got an extra file here called optimized bundling PNP.js. So I open that. That is where the importing of PNP is occurring. And I'm creating a class and just creating a method here, return PNP.js, and it's simply just returning back. Now, I don't need to do this in a separate file. I could have done this in the primary TypeScript file for the web part. I just simply like the organization. I could add additional methods if I want to here to do something else. to maybe support it in a way or pass data between if I needed to do additional functionality. So again, you don't have to put it in a separate file. I liked the organization of it, and it makes it easier to keep things separated. So we can see here, this is all this file is doing. So now let's go back, and we see here is the magic function. You see here, it's protected async and await, right? And so we're using async await, which is based on promises. And what's happening is we're saying, creating a constant, and we're saying await import, and then you'll notice here we're making a call to that ZH optimized bundling PNP.js. And it's returning that PNP.js constant that I just created, the default return PNP.js, which if we go back and look at the TypeScript file, right, is that guy right there. And so now it's returning that, and we see I'm calling that within my request list items. So I create a function called request list items, and that's where I'm making a call to that import function that was an async await. And then when it's done, right, we see the then, we can go in and do our sp.web.lists, everything you already saw in the web part, which you're already comfortable with now and familiar with, we're able to call. And once we get our data, we call generate HTML, which is a function down here that just goes in and creates that functionality and that display of the community contributors that we saw, right? Everybody keeping up so far? Yep, good. Pretty simple. Again, I tried to keep these very simple out of the box so that you could focus on the features of the technique specifically. So now what does this look like on a payload perspective? Let's come back. We'll bring up our dev toolbars. We'll refresh. And we're going to go ahead and filter this to ZH so we can see what we need. And before we saw 61K for our web part on load. Now that's down to 8.5K. Right? So we've saved 50-something K because we don't need PNP.js right away. So immediately on load, we're benefiting by a smaller payload because of optimized bundling. So now we're going to make a request. Keep an eye down here on the lower left. I'm just going to come up and I'm going to say we'll take 5. Retrieve contributors. And you see it's popped in, pulled in our contributors here, right? And you'll notice now our new PNP.js showed up. It called it in asynchronously, and now we've got the 57K showing up, which is worthwhile at that point because we know a user made a request. So we want to pull PNP.js in. We want to be able to utilize that. All right, so that's fantastic. And now you'll notice that I was not using caching. Go ahead and hover over that, get that. And so if I go ahead and go to 7, and I'll close the dev toolbar, and now you see the rest are showing up, and I can keep making the request. But you'll also notice that if I do that again, my network was refreshed. So I'm going to go ahead and go to 9. And so you know I'm not lying. We actually have 9, but no more request was made down at the bottom. It is still using the asynchronous. So it's not making an asynchronous request to pull that in every single time. It's just making it in at the first time the request was made. Once it's pulled in, you're good to go. And you can actually benefit by browser caching in that case too. You might notice that I've got that turned off. We're going to go right over here. Right there. I've got it turned off so that we can see the payloads and the sizes of everything for the session. But you can benefit by that as well if you wanted. All right, so now you may be saying, okay, all right, well that's fantastic. But it's still bundled technically within that individual web part. What if I make another web part that needs to actually connect to another list? I mean, that's going to be pretty common, right? We're going to have multiple web parts that connect to multiple lists. And what are we going to use? Well, of course, PNP.js, right? That's what we're going to use. It's the most powerful. It's the best. It's supported. 4 billion requests per month are made with it. So it's not lightly used. It's well supported by the community and Microsoft. So of course we're going to use it. But if multiple web parts on the page are using it, even if it's asynchronous, that still seems redundant, right? We don't necessarily need to use a request for the exact same library multiple times What do we do about that? That takes us to our third gear. So to date, we've hit the rubber on the road with an F1 turbo speed. We've put Parker into the air, supersonic speed. Anybody want to guess what can you possibly do in this Earth or outside that's possibly faster than supersonic? Anybody? Light speed, right? Light speed. He's channeling his Parker solo there. Somebody say, I think he looks like a cowboy. I get it, yeah, but you got Parker solo. So we're going to look at SPFx library components. Now, how many have started using or familiar with library components? Okay, just a few. Excellent. As I mentioned, they're the newest kid on the SPFx block, right? They just debuted in 1.9.1. They are SharePoint Framework solutions, so you would build them the exact same way that you would a web part or an extension. You'd still do the yo at Microsoft SharePoint. You would just simply select library components. But the difference is that a library component, it's a little more isolated. It likes to be by itself. It's the only thing you can have in your solution. You're not going to combine a library component with a web part in the same solution or an extension. It is the only thing you're going to have. And the reason behind it is because it's going to give you reusable functionality. And so what that looks like is the ability to include into a SharePoint Framework solution functionality, whether it's a pre-created library such as PNP.js, jQuery, or perhaps you have proprietary functionality that you need to execute within your organization. Maybe it needs to be used across multiple web parts. You can include that in a library component as well. So it packages it all into a SharePoint Framework solution. It's still an SPPKG, right? It's no different, very familiar, and allows you to access it from web parts. So what are the challenges without it? Well, we've kind of seen that, right? So you're going to put a library or functionality into a web part bundle, and you may do that across multiple web parts. And when you do that, what's going to be duplicated on the page? Well, of course, your web parts, but your bundles are. Even though they're isolated to the individual web part, you're still using the same functionality. PNP.js is theoretically and technically on there twice, 3 times, 4 times for each web part that's packaging it, even if it's optimized. You may be delaying that, but it's still going to be part of the page at some point if the user engages it. Now, you could also use external libraries. Andrew Connell's a big fan of this. At some point, there's a little tomato, right? Neither option is wrong. Neither option is right. It really depends on your organization, what you need. I personally like library components because it's familiar. As I mentioned, I can create SharePoint Framework solution. I know the landscape I'm in. I'm comfortable in it. I understand how it all works together. And so it's familiar to me. But you don't have to. You can use external resources. But library components kind of satisfy that. So what do they solve? Well, now they provide the ability for multiple web parts or extensions to connect to the functionality included in the library component. Okay? So in this case, we've packaged up jQuery, PNP.js, and some proprietary functionality into our library component. And you can see on the left, that's our page with our web parts. They're connecting to the library component, pulling in whatever it is that we need, and it's only happening once on the page, right? I see some people were looking to take photos, so I'll put it back up. It only happens once. It's only going to load once on the page. Even though you may have 1, 2, 3, 4, however many, a plethora of web parts on your page may be connecting to the library component, it's only going to load once. So you're going to be able to take advantage of that. So let's go ahead and take a look at a demo of how the library component is implemented. Go over and we'll go ahead and close from our last demo. Optimize bundling, library components. We'll start out with the library component. And as I mentioned, it is a separate solution. And it's pretty simple. I'm just simply doing a require on PNP.js. Right? I've got my file here. As you can see, it's doing the import. And I'm doing an import on it. Right? So there's not much to the library component. In this case, it's very simple. I'm just simply including like I did in both of the previous web parts, I'm just simply including PNP.js and returning it, right? So I've got my function, import PNP.js, I'm doing a require on it, I'm returning it, and that's all that's really needed. Now there's a way you make a connection between your web part and your library component. That's a little more advanced, so I don't want to waste your time. There's lots of good documentation on that. I know I've done some videos on it. I'm a big fan of library components. Alex Terentiev, who's in the front, has done a lot with library components. So definitely go check out some of these blogs. They're going to help you get started with it. This is going to focus on the technique here and the benefit. So we'll close that up. Library component's simple in terms of functionality, and we'll take a look at the web part. Now the web part, close this back up a little more. What I'm doing is, you'll notice, here's the key. Instead of importing PNP.js, I'm importing my library component. Now, I made a connection, as I mentioned, to the library component, use npm link to do all of that, and that's what creates a symlink, as they're called, a symbolic link, as if it was a global node module, right? So it allows my web part to see it as if it was a global node module. And then it allows me to utilize it. So it's called library component. If I come down, the way you make a connection to your library component is simply creating an instance, a constant here, and create a new instance. Library component, which is what was created right there when I imported it, and then ZH library component library, right? And that is what was included in my library component. And then from here, I'm calling the import PNP.js. We already know what that is. We've seen it in 2 of our previous web parts. It's simply going to return PNP.js. So I've set up, I went ahead and give it a name of PNP.js, and now this should start looking very familiar. We're just simply making a request to our list using the library component, which is a copy of PNP.js, right? So it gets very simple. We call it, once we get our items, we call the generate HTML, which again, as we've already seen, simply creates the HTML for our community contributors. Still the same list, same copy and paste almost as I was creating this to go from project to project. So it should be very, very simple to follow at this point. How does it look in practicality? Let's come on over to our third gear, library component, and we'll refresh. And I'm going to go ahead and bring up our network tab here. Refresh one more time since I didn't have that up right away. And we're going to go look at ZH. And I'll zoom in here, and you can see, well, there's our web part right there. And there is our library component, right? And we see that our web part is still very small, 6.6K. So the payload is small. Our library component has been loaded because it is being used. And we'll talk about that in a little bit, because I know you're already thinking something. So you should be. Now, I can go ahead and make the request. Go ahead and go down to 8. And we'll see all of our community contributors have been loaded. If I make the request for 10, you see it hasn't been added back again, so we still get that benefit of the fact that it's already been loaded. But wait, there's more. So if we edit the page and add another web part, we're going to go ahead and change our section here to a 2-column. I've got another web part that is essentially a copy of what we've already been using, but it is an entirely different web part. It's going to provide the same functionality. We're going to be able to make a request to the same list, but it's connecting to the same library component to pull in that data. So I'm going to go ahead and load that here, and we'll republish. And we know it's a different web part because it's telling us, right? Just trust me, totally different web part. Just trust me, no problem. All right, so I'm going to refresh. I'm going to look for our files. We see our copy web part is there, right? Both of our web parts are there. Our library component is there. And we can see that each of those, 6.7K, and our library component is 59. All right, so we know that it's loaded everything we need. So now we're going to go ahead and make some execution requests. We're going to go ahead and say we want to bring back 2 community contributors. And keep your eye on the bottom. because there we go, we got 2. There's just not enough room for them to be side by side. You'll notice that there was no connection made or request made for another copy of the library component, right? So let's go ahead and make the same request on our totally different web part. Just trust me. Go and refresh, and now we see we've got 5. Okay, so you'll notice nothing else was added down here. So now we've got multiple web parts pulling in PNP.js without having to duplicate it using a library component. I love them. I really do. They're fantastic. But I know what you're thinking. It loaded before you selected retrieve contributors. So I feel like we're back at step 1, right? You loaded it, or I should say speed 2, right, supersonic. We didn't need to load it until that request was actually made. All right, so that's going to take us to our 4th gear. This is fun. So far, turbo speed, supersonic speed, light speed. Anybody feel the Schwartz in the room? Ludicrous speed, right? Go! We've got Dark Parker, I guess. I don't know, Dark Helmet Parker, whatever we want to call them. We're going to combine everything together now. We're going to build a web part and a library component that's going to use caching. It's going to use optimized bundling. It's going to connect to the library component, and it's going to make it do everything we've seen so far in one single solution. All right, so let's take a look. We will switch over, and I will show you 4th gear again. Same interface here. We're not going to use multiple web parts this time. We're just going to use the single web part, and let's look at the code. We'll close our 3rd gear. We'll go ahead and look for 4th gear combination, and it really is set up just like the 3rd gear was. Except now, instead of having the async await request inside of our web part, we're actually putting it into our library component. And so you can see here where we have our public async await. This is just inside the primary library component. Async await, we're requesting the PNP.js, which is that separate TypeScript file right here, which is doing the importation of PNP.js. Because it is a SharePoint Framework solution, in the library component, I did install PNP.js, right? So that was installed in the library component, obviously, because we're going to pass it back to the web part. But the key here now that's different from supersonic speed is that we're not just making a request for PNP.js, right? We're making a request with async await for PNP.js. So what that means is we're still going to see a small payload of our library component when the web part loads, because the web part is going to see, hey, I use this library component, so I need to know a little bit about it. And because we're putting all the heavy lifting of PNP.js into a separate async await function, the only thing that's going to be in the payload is the basic stuff you see right here, wrapped up into a small SPFx JavaScript file. So that's all there is to it on the library component. Very, very simple. Let's go ahead and look at the web part. If we go into the web part here, it will be very similar to what we saw in the 3rd gear. We're importing our library component, and you may say, well, how does it know the library component is there? We had mentioned npm link, creating a symlink, but you do still actually create a dependency. So if we go look at package.json, you can see I'm making a request in my dependency list there to the library component. So that's a key when you actually go do your gulp bundle and package and all of that, because that lets it know, hey, I need that file. SharePoint is super smart, so behind the scenes, it knows to connect them based on the names and all of that. And you need to make sure that's included, by the way, because if you don't, SharePoint is smart enough to say, well, you're making a request to something that's a symlink on your machine, and because it's not listed as a dependency, I'm going to include it in the bundle. That's what you don't want, right? Because then all of a sudden you think you're doing this great thing by extrapolating out functionality to a library component, and guess what really happened, right? Bamboozled you and put PNP.js or whatever your reference is into the package anyway. So you always want to make sure you include your package.json dependency. From here, everything should be as familiar as we've already seen. We created our instance right here, which is connecting to our library component. So we see that request right up there again. Import star as library component from our library component. And then we use that instance to execute the function that returns our PNP.js. And from there, this should be dead simple by this point. We're very familiar, comfortable with this. But this time we're using caching. Last time we didn't. And you might say, probably you really want to use caching when you're actually allowing them to change the number? That seems like it's confusing. And it probably is. But I've seen organizations that say, well, we want to throttle in a very simple way, right? So we're going to put up a little note that's going to say maximum 1 request per minute, right? And this actually allows you to very simply do that. You could set your timeout or your cache to 1 minute, and then you're not going to get anything back even if they make the request, right? So you can kind of help the load on your SharePoint tenant by simply using this in simple ways. So we're using caching, and we're making the request. Remember, we're not seeing any async await here because it's already been done in the library component, right? So we don't need to worry about doing it here. So what does the payload look like then? What's the practicality? We'll go ahead and bring this up. We will refresh, and we'll look for ZH again. And so now we see on our web part, we see here's our web part. Oops. Here is our web part and our library component have been loaded. Like I said, there still has to be that little payload of your library component there so your web part knows it's accessible, it needs it. But if we go look at the actual size now, we're down to 7.6K and 3.3K. Much faster. Much faster. It's going to load much faster, it's going to be much smaller, and so we're going to have access to that. So now let's see what happens when I make the request. Go ahead and we'll say we want 5. You'll notice they've gone plaid, right? Ludicrous speed, we went plaid. But you may also have noticed that the rest of our JavaScript chunk came in asynchronously, right? And that is a little heavier right there, 43.1K, but it's necessary at that point, right? We want it to come down at that point because we need it to connect to the list and pull in the data. So now we've kind of covered all the bases. And again, it is cached. So if I were to come up here and I'll move this down a little bit more, and we'll say we want 7. And I'll say retrieve. You'll notice didn't do anything, right? Because we have our caching. So if I come back to application and I look for ZH, we see there's ZH list data optimized LC for library component. I delete it. Of course, I could always open a new tab. It is a session storage. I hit retrieve. I'll close this. And you can see now it's pulled in the other 2. So we have gone full circle. We've gone turbo speed where we included caching. We've gone supersonic speed where we've taken that usage of PNP.js out into a separate file, pulled it in only when necessary. We've gone light speed where we've completely extrapolated out of our web part the need to include PNP.js or any other library, by the way, any other library. And then we've gone full circle into ludicrous speed, right? We've gone plaid. We've asynchronously called in the functionality from a library component. It feels like Inception. We're in a library component that's going asynchronous. Holy cow, is that possible? Yes, and you should use it. So we've combined all these techniques. All right, so patterns and practices. We talked a little bit about this up front. PNP.js is a product of that. If you are not on the PNP calls, do yourself a favor and make time for them. I call them a crystal ball into the future of SharePoint. Because how many in the room have trouble keeping up with all of the changes from Microsoft? Everybody, right? Me too. But you know what? Change is a good thing. Improvements are a good thing. I don't want back the days where I got one feature pack a year and every 3 years we got a new server that made me go, oh, why didn't they include this? Now it's like weeks and it's like, oh my gosh, they included this, right? It's awesome. But it can be hard to keep up with. PNP calls, be on them. Make time for them. Believe me, you will thank me later. GitHub repositories. So safe to say we're probably all devs here or fringe devs or connected to devs or something. This is a resource for you to not have to reinvent the wheel. Every single thing I showed off today is in a sample in the GitHub repos, plus more. So use them. You can use them all you want for free, no cost. It is amazing to use. So make sure you go check it out. And then there is issue support. Now this is development issue support, not Microsoft support necessarily, right? To be clear, if you're having trouble during development, this is issue support given by the community. There are Microsoft employees that triage it, but it is mostly given by the community. So try to be nice. We're all trying to help out on our free time. We don't get paid to do that. But the community is one of the most collaborative. Make sure you make time for it. It is going to help you out. We're all in this together. We're not alone. So utilize patterns and practices. It's there for your benefit. It's there for you, by you. And you can contribute back, too. Even if you don't know how, there's an initiative to help you contribute back if you want to help out. You'll get your name on the list of contributors every single month. You can get your company name on the list of contributors every single month, so there's benefits. And once you get that up there, you go to your boss and say, see what I did? Here's my raise. Where do I get it? Right? Where's my promotion? I just got your company name on the list. So that's fantastic. But it is not made up magically. It happens by a lot of hard work by people in the community. Here is some of the faces of our community contributors. Now, I started m365.social. This is a blog post that includes amazing contributors in our community that spend countless hours creating blogs, demos, samples. If you are new to SharePoint, or you are trying to figure out where do I keep up with everything, go visit that. I'm trying to keep it up to date with everyone that's contributing, but we are all in this together, as I mentioned, and we need to support one another. And this is an amazing collection of people. I see a lot of cameras still up, so I'll wait. They spend their time free to help all of us. All right, everybody get their pictures? Excellent. Oh, wait, sorry. There you go. You're welcome. Okay. m365.social, continually adding people to it. You can even request someone to be added to it if you'd like. Tried to fit everybody that I knew, so it is an organic, growing list of contributors. So again, if you're new or you know someone that is new in the community and trying to figure out who to follow, where to gain that information, definitely send them there. It should be beneficial. And thank you for your time today. That URL will take you to a blog post on my site, which includes the session slides, as well as a link to a zip file that includes all of the samples. So they're all organized by gear. And again, if you're a sticker fan, I've got stickers, except for this guy. I haven't gotten him made yet with the trophy. But if you want stickers, then come up and feel free. Thank you, guys.